Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen, back with what I think is a great mini-series because I get to learn from people I like, Hollywood Explained. This episode, we've got Andy Horowitz, and we're going to be talking about directors. We're going to kick it off because we were text messaging back and forth about the new David Fincher movie, The Killer. And then I told Andy, let's do an episode. I want to know how you pick directors for these movies you've been a part of. What's going on in the room when you guys are picking Christopher Nolan for Batman movies or Suicide Squad, American Hustle, Triple Frontier, all your big movies. And so that's what we're in for. Andy, let's kick it off with, for anybody who doesn't know, Andy owns Big Swell, and they're incredible, and you should check them out. But Andy, let's talk about The Killer. Why do you think this has gotten attention in a way that action movies haven't? I mean, today we're really going to be talking about directors for action movies. But what do you think is special here?
I mean, first of all, it was directed by David Fincher, who is one of the best directors, I think, ever. He would definitely probably be in it. If someone made a top 10 list, he would probably be in there. It's that movie is obviously I loved it. I thought it was great. I think it had a few things. I think the reason why it's been dominating the conversation when a movie like that normally wouldn't. I mean, think about a movie like that. I think if you released it theatrically, I don't know if that movie makes money theatrically because it doesn't feel like it's for a wide audience. That movie also, at least from what I've heard, cost $150 million. You know, when you look at it on the screen, most of that money is hidden. You'll never notice it. Like you look at that early. I first watched that movie before I heard that. I'm like, you can make that movie for $20 million. Like, where did they spend all the money? And then when you get into it and you remember who David Fincher is, you realize that like so much of it is so perfected to a point that you lose sight of like where the visual effects are, what he's faking, what he's doing to accomplish what he's doing. And it's so well done that to us or to regular people, I think especially people outside of Hollywood, they don't notice anything that he's doing that he's spending money on because it's all in the background. But when you look at, and people that are listening to this, you should go online and find the visual effects breakdowns that some of the visual effect artists have been doing that worked on that movie. And it will blow your mind in terms of what is real and what's not real in that film and how he shot some of the sequences, like the scene on the moped when he's driving through the city. And even the building that he's aiming at with the sniper rifle that looks like it's right across the street when it's actually not. And all of it is, it's just David Fincher is a true master. And there are no studios in town that would have ever given him that amount of money to make that kind of movie except Netflix. And it's the exact reason why he will only make his movies at Netflix, or he has only made his movies at Netflix for the last, 7 years. And he refuses to go anywhere else because he sort of has a blank check there. And he just tells them, he doesn't have any rules. He has no guardrails. He has no budgetary restrictions. He can go do whatever he wants to do. And I think that aspect of Netflix's mentality towards filmmakers like him gives us movies like The Killer. That movie would have never happened in a traditional studio, especially that way. They would have given him $30 million or $40 million and said, go make the movie. But to give him the right amount of money to make the movie that well, he's a different breed of that guy, David Fincher. He really is. He's incredible.
And correct me if you know differently, but I thought I saw that it hit #1 most viewed worldwide on Netflix.
I don't know. Most new movies will hit that in their first week because of the algorithm and how it there's not that many new things that come out. That one did have good word of mouth. I don't know. I think #1 worldwide on Netflix is vastly different than a budget, box office success.
Sure.
#1 box office. Those are two completely different things. Netflix doesn't ever really give us real data in terms of what's happening behind the scenes there. How many people clicked on it and finished it comparatively, those are two very different things. All that kind of stuff is very much in the background. But yeah, of course, a new movie like that is gonna be #1 on Netflix for at least the first.
And my feeling, I wonder if you feel differently, is that this has a real chance to be that perennial seller where 5 years from now and 10 years from now, people are still watching it start to finish. Like it's not
Yeah.
just the fade into the background kind of movie.
I think so, but I will say, to me, it feels like it's a sophisticated, highbrow kind of film. It's not a wide release commercial film where you're going to get
Fast and the Furious
an
15.
audience of all shapes and sizes. Right, exactly. It's a very specific audience, but it's an audience that, like, that we don't get a lot of these movies. I think audiences were kind of starving for them too. I also think, Netflix, and I've made a Netflix movie and I love that company, but they don't have the most amazing track record for making quality movies. And so I also think when they make one, it's people's expectations aren't, they're a little bit lower going into them. So when it's good, it's really good. And there's that aspect, I think, that goes not necessarily for that movie, but when the more quality Netflix films, I think, are surprising sometimes, in terms of how good they are.
Yeah,
this was one that I think really, really shocked everyone.
I'm interested in your thoughts. I've been watching some of the interviews about Michael Fassbender having to take time off car racing to do this, right? And but just Fincher talking about like why Fassbender was the right choice in his mind, and even going back, he was talking about like even his role in Haywire and stuff, and like again, both you and I know people from the special operations community, and unlike the movies, most of them are not huge muscle-ridden guys in my experience, right? Like Fassbender is actually like, even though his backstory isn't like a military special operations guy, like he's definitely of that ilk, right? And so
he has a skill set.
I guess the question is, when you watch that film and you're thinking about the craft, the mastery that Fincher as a director has to get a performance out like that from Fassbender, what kind of thoughts occur to you?
Well, to me, knowing it's a Fincher movie, I know that, like, and I realize, there's a take. There's Fincher is famous for like having someone do the same thing 62 times, and just going over and over and over and over and over and over again. There are some actors, famously have had real big problems with that. I think even Ben Affleck has mentioned that, like, it was like, there was a scene, I think, in Gone Girl where it was like him just sliding a cup to across the counter, and he asked him to do it like 52 times or something. And so I think when you're doing a Fincher movie, you know what you sign up for, and it's not for everybody, in terms of, like, not all actors would be such good sports. You're going to make a good movie because it's a David Fincher movie, so you'll probably be proud of whatever you end up doing. But it's a challenge. He's an easy guy. He's never a guy that's going to accept anything but perfection. And so when you have someone like Michael Fassbender, who is a true chameleon, who can literally do anything, it's like an artist with his paintbrush. Like, Fassbender is like the paintbrush. He's the tool that I think that he's going to be able to get the art out of. And he did such a good, like, the subtlety in that movie is so good. It's why, like, how subtle that character is, how cold he is at times, and how calculated he is, and the way that he lays things down, and the way that his life, the stretching, the weird little things that he does with, like, the stretching and the yoga and all of that stuff. I think it's what makes that character so interesting and so scary and mysterious. And it's those little things that make all the difference. And Fincher's just so good at doing that stuff. He's so good at just getting these things out of actors that they probably didn't even know that they had. But he has a process, and the process is not for everybody. And it's why, he found a home at Netflix. It just kind of lets him, like I said, he lets him do his thing, and you get these things out of it. But he's just, I don't know, I don't think he's ever had a bad performance in a Fincher movie, because he would never allow it. He would continue to push you and push you and push you until something great came out. And that's what he does. And that's what he did with Fassbender. And, Fassbender, as you said, it's like he's somewhat unassuming. If you would, like, meet him in real life, you would never, like, be, like, concerned or scared of someone like that. But the way that his performance is in the movie, like I said, all those little things add up to a character that is capable. And you're never really, I don't know, it was one of those, even that scene where he's in that, like, super intense fight with that giant man, in a weird way, like, I never felt scared for him. Like, there was never a moment where I felt like he wasn't going to get better in this situation. And it's because of the character prep that went into everything prior to that allowed you to know that he was going to be successful. But even that scene, like the fight choreography in that scene was really different. It was brutal, and you hadn't seen fight scenes like I hadn't seen a fight scene like that in a long time. It was all took place in a house. Every single punch and throw through a wall, you felt it as an audience. Even sitting on your couch, you didn't have to be in a movie theater, and you still like the brutality of those fight scenes. It felt very real. It really did. It just felt like it didn't feel like a traditional action fight scene.
Yeah. For a more professional question on it, thinking about this as a producer who's been on these big $100 million plus movies, how would you approach that? If like somebody says they want to make a sophisticated action movie like this, right? So how do you approach that differently as a producer compared to we're going to make just your popcorn movie that is going to have a lot of spectacle, but not have this kind of restraint, not kind of have this level of sophistication? How does that change your approach as a producer, knowing what you're trying to make?
The success, in my opinion, the most successful ones are the ones that have the right amount of prep time, because all of your work, all the heavy lifting is going to be done in the prep period for this, which means that by the time you actually get to set and you're shooting on the day, you've done it so many times that it's become just formulaic at that point. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I think even in Triple Frontier, we did it. There was our stunt coordinator was a guy named Guy Norris, who is amazing. He's a really close friend of mine. I'm actually seeing him for lunch tomorrow. He was the action unit director and stunt coordinator on Mad Max Fury Road. He's actually done every George Miller film, all the way back to the old Mad Max movies. He did Suicide Squad with me. He did Triple Frontier with me. He did Furiosa, which a trailer comes out with today, and I'm really excited to see it because I hear Furiosa is going to be amazing. But a guy like that is a guy that you're going to want to be able to start working on your movie really early with you. Like probably one of the first people in when you're starting a movie like that. And there's all sorts of new technology these days, and one in particular that the guy uses that allows him to actually film these sequences and plan them out before you ever even have a set or a location or a camera or an actor. And it requires you to be working with the director early on and using stunt guys, and you essentially can put them in a CG world. It's what we call previs. And so it's a pre-visualization of the scene. When I was doing Suicide Squad, previs would take you would previs out all your action sequences. So you can essentially see like an animation version of your action sequence. You can understand where you're going to want to put the camera and how you're going to shoot it and what it's going to look like. And you're watching it sort of in animation form. But if you want to make this is back in 2015, if you wanted to make any changes, let's say you wanted to see what it looks like from the other side, or you wanted to have the car fall off the bridge as opposed to crash on the bridge, you would send those changes to your previous house, and it would take you like 2 weeks to get that back, and then be able to see what it looks like, and then decide if it's the right version. And then when you have a locked version of that scene, you then disseminate that to all of your department heads, and everyone can understand what we're going to be shooting and watch it before we even get there. Guy has developed this technology that allows you to essentially work with previs in real time. And so you can put people in suits. You can have them work these fight scenes out. You can even place the camera in different areas that you want. You can change the lighting. And so you can essentially map out your exact scene before you ever even, in some cases, have financing for your movie. So you can so on the day when you get there, you are ready to go, because the thing that's working against you almost always in these big movies, especially the ones with the big action sequences, is time. Time is so expensive on a movie set when you're shooting it. You're spending, on a traditional big budget movie, you're spending probably close to $300,000 a day in production. And so every day is very expensive. Every time you don't make your day, that costs money. And so having all that prep up front to be able to map out those sequences, know exactly where the punches are going to be, where the cameras are going to be, where the lights are going to be, where your crew is going to be standing, and have all of your crew know that before you get there on the day, is going to help you get through the sequences and allow you as a director or a producer to know that you're getting the best version of that sequence because you've watched it in animation form many times and you know it's going to work when you get there on the day. Of course, sometimes there's things that come up and, there's hiccups that happen, but for me, it's all about having the right amount of prep to be able to do that the right way.
And so thinking about a movie like a business, what does that look like? Is that you just like literally writing into a budget and a time frame? Hey guys, let's be honest here. This is getting more prep than regular. We would have had 30 days. Now we're going to have 90, or what does that actually tactically look like?
I mean, it's more about, it depends. If you're making a smaller movie where your budget is limited and constrained, it's about and hoping that you're going to be able to get people to work for free to in that prep period, to sort of like, they're so excited about the movie. They know they're constrained budgetarily. So they're already into it with your director, and sometimes you can get that out of them. But more often than not, if you're on a big studio movie at a big studio, and you have multiple action sequences or fight scenes, you know from the start that one of the first people you're hiring is your stunt coordinator, and you're starting way before anyone else has started, because that stuff requires so much prep. To do stunts the right way and to do them safely, it's tremendous responsibility for a stunt coordinator, especially these days. And it's the one thing that you're never ever going to want to cut corners on, or do things the cheap way, or you'll have tons of safety issues if you do that. To me, it's always like my scariest days as a producer when we're doing big stunt sequences, because so many things can go wrong. You're doing really dangerous stuff, but that if you're having the right people that are running the show that have done this many times before, and you're making sure that they have all the resources they need to do this safely in the right way, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. But when you're making some of these big films and there's big action sequences, your stunt coordinator / action unit director / second unit director is going to be one of the first people you bring on, because it's going to be one of the first things you really need to start planning out. And these days, it's really hard to create action sequences or fight scenes that stand out, because they're done so well. There's this company 8711 that's run by Chad Selesky and David, and they're incredible. They do all the John Wick movies, and like they're the best in the business at fight scenes and stunt stuff, and they have an entire school now that they're like training stunt coordinators, and they've created this entire program. But those guys have created a name for themselves because everything they do pushes the limits on the stunt side of things, and they go further and further and further. And even when we first saw the first John Wick, it was like mind-blowing from a stunt point of view of what they were doing in that movie. And all the John Wicks, they really pushed the limits in every single one of those things. So bringing one of those guys in really early in the process, probably one of your first few people hired, is of utmost importance.
And so, what's that process like? Like, so whether it's, Christopher Nolan on Dark Knight, J.C. Chandor on Triple Frontier, what's the interaction and what's your role as a producer in working with the Christopher Nolans, the J.C. Chandors, and helping them pick stunt coordinators, being involved, the interaction there? Yeah, what does that actually look like behind the scenes?
As a producer, we're super involved. It depends. A guy like Chris Nolan, he's good. He's done this a million times. He's got his guys. His guys are the same people in every movie. He's got a working methodology with them. It works every time. He's a machine. He knows who he wants. He goes and gets that person. He could get anyone in town if he calls them, unless they're in the middle of another job or they're just physically not available. We'll run to that project if he calls. There are other, JC's a really good example. On Triple Frontier, he had never done a movie that had action sequences in it. So this was his first time, and this was significant action sequences in this. So it was really important to us to pair him with someone that we knew was going to be the right type of action unit director, stunt coordinator, and second unit director that is comfortable working with a director that hasn't done this stuff. And so that relationship was so important on that movie, because we needed these guys to really like each other, enjoy each other's company, work well together. We needed JC to be comfortable enough to let Guy tell him what he doesn't know, and JC not have issues with that. But more importantly, on that movie, we had a second unit. And a second unit is something that like Chris Nolan, as far as I remember, doesn't shoot a second unit. And a second unit essentially means that there's a whole other unit going on with another director that's directing, whether it's stunt scenes, anything without your principal actors in it. So you have all your doubles. You can shoot people from the behind. You can get stunts. You can get insert shots. You can get all sorts of things without principal actors. And on big movies, almost every big movie will have a second unit that's out there doing stuff while your first unit is shooting. Some directors that haven't had a second unit before, that can make them very uncomfortable. And I totally get it. You're saying that someone else is directing the movie with me, but I'm, and so when you explain to them that we physically don't have enough time to do it all in main unit, which is why we have to split these units up. Second unit is out there doing their thing. We're out here doing our thing. Sometimes there's some cross-pollination between the two. Chris is the kind of guy, like Nolan's kind of guy, is, and this is, maybe that's changed, but this is what he's always been like, is he doesn't have a second unit. He shoots every shot of himself. He's there every day. He has the freedom and flexibility of the studio to get as many days as he wants usually, so there's really not that issue. Everyone knows, the line producers, the budget, people that are working on the budget, everyone knows what his process is, and so you budget accordingly, knowing there's going to be no second unit. With JC on Triple, it was very different because he had never done action, and so that relationship, and I knew because I'd worked with Guy already, he's like the loveliest human being. There's no one I've never seen him raise his voice. He doesn't get upset. He's so user-friendly. There's not a single person I've ever met that doesn't like him. He was the perfect guy for that relationship to work, where he can walk JC through how to do these action sequences and get the trust that you're going to need from a director. You're going to need your director to really trust you as a second unit director, that you're not out there shooting junk that they're going to have to then reshoot if they don't like it. And you're also going to want to make sure that this is a person that's telling you that, like, yeah, this action sequence is cool and different and good. And, what you can do when you want to push the limits, you want to have a director be able to, like, have someone to talk to and be under the tent with them. And so that relationship is really important. There are some directors that just have their people that they've worked with on every movie. And as long as those movies go well, the studios will usually let those people bring their crew with them. But sometimes when you have a movie that's taking a director that's taking a step up, that hasn't done stunts before, you're going to need to surround them with the best people humanly possible. And as a producer, that always makes, if you do that, your job is easier because you have less to worry about.
So let's talk about this process. So, J.C. Chandor's a Margin Call and All Is Lost and The Most Violent Year before Triple Frontier. What was going on in your production meetings? How do names get on the list? How did you guys settle on him?
For JC? That was, on Triple Frontier, that movie was dormant. It was sitting collecting dust for, from the time that we had sold it, because that was originally Catherine Bigelow directing that movie, and Mark Bull had written it, and there was they had some issues at the studio, and the studio decided we're not going to make the movie. And so Paramount just sort of sat on it from 2009 until 2015. So they sort of sat on it for 6 years. And then when we were in the middle of making Suicide Squad, we had gotten a call because people had known about the movie. And so we got a call from JC's agent saying, hey, they heard about this Project Triple Frontier. I think he had a meeting with Paramount at the time and they had brought it up to him. And he really sparked to it. He really sparked to the idea of what it was, and he wanted to make a movie like this. And so I remember him, he had never done action before, and I remember we brought him out to set to Suicide Squad. And we brought him out for two reasons. First reason, we wanted him to meet Guy Norris, because we knew that if he was going to do this, we needed Guy to be with him. And Guy was in the middle of doing Suicide Squad with us. And two, we wanted to show him what this is like when you're on a $100+ million movie and you've got a scene with 50 people in it and things blowing up and 50 machine guns shooting at each other. And so I remember we brought him, he came on this day that was so incredibly intense, where it was this alley scene and there was this massive fight with 50 people and all 50 people had machine guns. They were shooting. It was chaos that day, just in terms of what we were shooting. And at that point too, we had, Will Smith was going to be in the movie. And so he came out there to meet with Will as well. And it was just, and I remember that he was so intelligent in terms of the way he was speaking about the movie. And I personally we were huge fans of everything he had done up until this point. And we knew that we needed somebody for that movie that wasn't just going to focus on the action scenes, but was really going to pay attention to the human drama and what was going on and the message of the movie, and that the action scenes would just complement all of that, not the reverse. And JC was kind of the perfect guy for that, because he really understands character and emotion, and knowing that we were going to pair him up with someone like Guy, and that relationship started, we had him meet Guy in 2015. We didn't end up making the movie until 2018. Guy actually made a whole nother movie in between then before he came up and worked with us. And in fact, the crazy thing is that when we actually had one version of the movie that we were going to make at Paramount that we started prep on, we didn't have Guy Norris because he wasn't available. And in a weird happenstance world, when that version of the movie didn't come together the right way, and we got the movie back up like 6 months later, he was now available, and so now he was able to come back, and the relationship just fit so well. So
So
I don't know.
so
I can't remember where we started, but that was
what's going through your mind as producers on this when it's like, you're thinking, like you say Catherine Bigelow, and I'm thinking of Zero Dark 30. There's a certain flavor to that, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, JC Shandor is calling you, saying, "Hey, what about me?" What's that conversation like? Like, what's the conversation with you guys as you're thinking, like, "Oh, how could this work?" Like, what are the concerns? What are the go forwards? How do you guys sort through that? Like, oh, this is different than what we had been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I was still kind of a young exec, so he didn't call me. He called my boss, Chuck Rowe, at the time. But it was
all of you Atlas people were in a room.
But then Chuck,
at some point.
But then Chuck called us and was like, what do we think? And I was like, his movies are amazing, and he's an extraordinarily talented person, and if he's interested in this, absolutely, 100%. And he had just done A Most Violent Year, which I had loved, and it was his biggest movie to date. I think it was a $20 million movie, had some size and scale to it comparatively to the last stuff that he had done. So we could see that throughout his career, he's been taking incremental steps up and up and up. And with JC, anyways, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's a really nice guy, and he's also like great in a room. And so, which is so important as a director. It really is, because as a director, you're selling yourself and your vision all the time. You have to be somewhat of a salesman, and you have to be charismatic, and you have to convince an actor or a producer or a studio to give you their time or a tremendous amount of money, and that's not easy to do. And I remember with him, it was just about him talking about his vision for the movie, and us just being huge fans of his last one. And Paramount, who we were making the movie with at that time, was all in on it. They were excited about it. And so it just, all those things came together, and it just made sense. We weren't even actively out there looking for a director on that movie. We had sort of assumed that like it was dead, it just wasn't making any progress. And he was, when he came to the party and decided and came to us and said, "Hey, I would love to do this movie. What do you guys think?" It was sort of like, it was like the only conversation we were having with the director about that. There weren't other conversations. And so it just came together the right way. He was saying all the right things. His vision was the right way. He's worked with great talented people in the past, and we knew that he was going to be able to get the right level of talent that we needed to make the movie the right way.
Well, and I want to talk about that because you've been at Atlas by like 8 or 10 years by now, by the time this conversation's happening?
At that point, let's see, I started in 2007, and that was 2015 when this was happening. Yeah, so about 8 years. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm interested in, everybody's got so many opinions about film, right? And who's good and who's not and these kind of things. I'm interested when you make a statement like, "We knew he was really great." How is that? Obviously it's subjective in ways, but it's objective enough that you guys could all agree. Help me understand that, like, this person's great or this person's great for this subject matter, and what goes into a decision tree like that would just seem like gut feel to everybody on the outside.
Yeah, there's a few things. I think first one we do as producers, obviously you watch his previous work. You decide if you like his previous films. That's step one. If you like those things. Step two is call people that were involved in the making of that movie. Everyone's a phone call away. You can get so much information about a filmmaker by calling the producers on it, as long as they weren't his like producing partners that were producing it, like objective producers, director of photography, stunt coordinator, editor, the studio executives that were the executive on that movie. You should be calling all those people and asking, what was it like? Did you have a good experience? What were the pluses? What were the minuses? Would you do it again with him? Yeah, you take all that in. If you're getting negativity back on all those things multiple times, you're going to want to think twice. Like, sometimes like a good movie is not necessarily a product of a director doing a good job. It's a product of everyone else around them saving the movie and doing a good job. And so, usually Hollywood is a small town. If directors are problematic, if directors are insufferable, if they're assholes, if they are doing horrible things, there's no secrets in this business. That usually will, especially if they're on a big movie, that word will spread very quickly. It will usually get to us producers before we even have to call and make those calls. So we have some understanding of like what the pre-existing issues are. But even if I hear that sometimes, you're still going to want to call people just to like, what was it like, and I'm not saying I would say no to a director that maybe has that reputation. It depends on the situation. So I think that would be the first step, right? Is getting all that information as a producer, collecting all that. And by the way, a studio before they hire that director as well is going to do the same thing. They're going to want to know from other people that just worked with them. Secondly, I think especially when you're talking about a director that's taking a step into a world that he's never been in before. So it could be a director that is coming from pure comedy and is taking a step into drama. I think it's a good example of that is Adam McKay. I mean, if you look what Adam McKay, where he started and the kind of movies he's making now are wildly different. When you look at movies like, The Big Short comparatively to Talladega Nights or Step Brothers, those are very different movies, but that director has done both those things. Adam McKay directed the pilot of Succession. Like who would have ever thought that the guy that directed the pilot of Succession is the same guy that did Talladega Nights and Step Brothers and all the other stuff he was doing before that. So, instinctively when you meet with these people, like, why do they want to make this transition? That's a really important question to ask them. You've been so successful doing these kind of movies. Why do you want to take this risk? And that answer is going to tell you a lot. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I want to switch to David Ayer to David and Suicide Squad and thinking about I want to talk about the role of the writing, spectacle. I'm thinking like, spectacles like Fast and Furious, the Training Day, End of Watch, Sabotage, Fury, right? How much does the skill of writing change the flavor as you think about their directing?
It's pretty significant. I mean, if they're a writer-director, it's huge because the movie lives in their brain before it lives in anyone else's. And it's also, you have to really take that into consideration when you're talking about how much prep you need for the movie, because there's always going to be rewriting happening all the way up until, a few weeks before you start shooting. And that's really hard for directors to do, to go off and, we used to say with David, it's like he's got to go in his cave for 2 days and like get these pages to us. And when a director goes in their cave and in the middle of prep on a big movie, you've got 150 people that need 150 answers from them every hour that they can't get for 2 days. And then they're all coming to me, running into my office going, what do we do? I'm like, we got to just wait till he comes out of the cave and we can talk to him. So that, that's always, it's really hard. And JC used to do it too. And JC was writing on Triple Frontier as well. And it's a really, really difficult thing to balance. I think that, the other challenge sometimes with writer-directors is that the movie lives in their head. And even though they're writing the script, there are some things that they know because they're seeing it in their head that they don't always put it exactly on the page. And so, like, there were times I remember on Triple where, like, JC's such a good writer, but sometimes, like, he just, as a studio, when you're talking about, like, Netflix, for example, and they're about to give you $100 million to go make a movie, and they have a note, and then you tell them, like, don't worry, I'll do it. It's not good enough. Like, it needs to be on the page. You need to show me what it's going to look like on the page. And so a lot of directors forget that sometimes, just organically, because the movie's living in their brain. And so I remember having it, with JC, sometimes it was like, I understand, I know you're going to do it on the day, and I know that you know exactly how to do it, but I need to show it to a studio on a page of what you're going to do. And they need to approve what it says and what the dialogue says and what it's going to look like. So we're all good with this note that they have. So that, I think, I love having a writer director because it allows you it's a one-stop shop. You're not sort of, the development process is tricky because if you don't have a writer director, you just have a writer and then you have a director. That relationship has to work beautifully. And if it doesn't, you as a producer are you're pulling your hair out because you're trying to get the writer to do sometimes the director will give the writer notes. Sometimes he'll come back to me as a producer, say he doesn't like the notes. Can we go back to him and can you talk to him and see if we can make some compromise on those notes? And then it's me in the middle of all of that, right? And you're doing this dance between the director and the writer and hoping that they're not going to hate each other throughout this process, because if that happens, you're in real trouble. They saw, and so it's such a symbiotic relationship. If it's not the same person doing both, you really need them to be sharing a brain. You also need your writer to be like available and a part in there with it. Like I always love to have my writer like on set as much as you can, especially at the beginning of the movie and in prep, because sometimes you need to turn around pages, especially if the director's not writing. Then there is a situation sometimes where if a director doesn't write at all, there are some directors in town that do what we call, they'll develop a script to death because they're not great in the development process. They don't necessarily know exactly what they want, or they're asking for things that are impossible, or their notes are difficult, or their notes, they continue to keep moving the goalpost, and they just are having creative issues in that developmental process. And that happens a lot and it's why a lot of movies don't get made, because the creative visions just don't align. And some directors are sort of famous for developing movies to death, and maybe they came off of a super hot TV show that they're directing amazing episodes of this TV show, but a TV show there's very little developmental input from a director on a TV show because that machine is coming from a showrunner. And all of a sudden that director is on a movie where the whole creative vision is supposed to be coming from them, and they're trying to get it out to a writer, and that just doesn't work sometimes. And so that transition from directors from television to film is not always an easy transition for some people. And there are like some of the highest caliber directors in television have just been unsuccessful in making the transition because that development process is tricky and difficult for them sometimes.
Interesting. I'm interested
Yeah.
I'm interested as you think about, I like your analogy of a director as a painter, right? But it's like, they've got to paint the background, the foreground, the lighting, everything, right? Let's talk about David for a minute. Two of his movies that resonate with me more are End of Watch and Fury. When you think about his effect as a director on those, obviously this is pre-Suicide Squad. How would you describe it? Like, what do you think about those movies and his role as the director of them?
Well, when we hired him off of Fury, that was the movie. He had that movie that movie hadn't come out yet when we hired him for Suicide Squad, and he was in post-production on it, but we saw the movie and I loved it as well. I thought it was amazing. And I had obviously seen his previous movies, and those were, some of them I loved and some of them I didn't. I loved End of Watch as well. I thought that one was great too. But one thing I did know about David that there was absolutely no doubt about is he was an incredible writer. He wrote Training Day. He's responsible, which not a lot of people know this, he's responsible for the Fast and the Furious franchise, even though he didn't get a writing credit on it. He was the one that actually created the Fast and the Furious that we know today, that deals with cars and not motorcycles, and deals with, it all came from him. So he is an incredible writer. And we knew that from the beginning. And his writing and the tone of his movies all have like a somewhat serious tone to them. But what we also knew, especially coming off of Fury, is that the actors loved working with him because his process is intense and extreme, and they loved that. And we knew we needed that.
I want to talk about that because, you look at look at his other movies, let's just take pre-Suicide Squad. Let's look at something like Street Kings, right? Versus Fury. Yeah. Fury has a level of sophistication that Street Kings doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so talk to me more about this. Like, how do you know actors like working for him, and why do you feel confident that the next ones will too?
Well, we knew because we had spoken to some of the actors and the actors' reps from that movie, and they were so high on it. And you saw what he got out of those actors. Barenthal and Shia LaBeouf and Brad Pitt. Just amazing stuff out of these guys. And you're not going to get a guy like Brad Pitt to have a performance like that. You're not even going to get a guy like that unless you're doing something special. Unless and so. Seeing Fury and seeing what he got out of those guys, and then hearing about the process, because we hired our military advisors who we hired on Squad and Triple Frontier, Kevin Vance, came from Fury and came from David. I actually met Kevin through David Ayer. He's been on all David Ayer movies. And I remember even Kevin telling me like how intense it got on the training and what David put these people through, these actors, and we asked them. And then I heard that like David did these things with his actors where he would have like group therapy sessions in prep where they would get like really he would get like deep with his act like as a group. So like even on Squad we did it, or he did it. We weren't a part of it, but it was just the director and the actors. And they'd all sit in a room and they would get into like heavy stuff about like their childhoods, and he does that on purpose because he wants everyone to feel like a family. When you know all these things about the people that you're working with and every day, it creates a bond and a relationship, and then oftentimes that translates to the screen. You feel that. It's why like the process of making Suicide Squad was amazing because the cast we had the best time ever. It was a huge family. I had heard it was the same thing on Fury, and so when we had heard that on Fury, we knew that we had to create something like that on Suicide Squad because we had this ensemble cast. And think about the cast on Fury was an ensemble cast. And so we were able to watch Fury and go, okay, he brought something really different to the World War II movie. That was a different version of one that we'd ever seen. He had an ensemble cast that he got amazing performance out of everybody. The script was incredible. The visual effects were done in such a smart, sophisticated way with the tracer bullets and how he did them in that movie. It looked great. That was a hard movie. We knew that he got through it. They delivered it on time and on budget. All those everything. And then you look at what Suicide Squad was, and on paper, an early version of Suicide Squad, those are all the things we needed in a filmmaker to bring to Suicide Squad. We had an ensemble cast. We had a big visual effects element. We knew that our cast, we needed them to like really go there in that movie. There was a military element of Suicide Squad in terms of like there's a whole military group in that movie that's a big part of that movie. So just so many reasons why he made sense. And then of course like the cherry on top was like, oh, by the way, he's also going to write it. And then when that came to be, we knew we were going to get an amazing script out of him, and we did. The first version, the original version of the movie, not the one that actually got released, but his original script was pretty incredible. It was, I would say the closest thing. It was the closest thing that I had read in the DC universe to like the Nolan movies that they had made up until that point. His original script.
Yeah. Which, as we were talking about beforehand, as a producer, you were saying like, sometimes when a movie isn't great, you can tell, was that, you guys in the business can tell, was that the director that messed it up? Or was that the studio that messed it up? Was that, where did the politics play? And unfortunately, there's many opportunities for a movie to have some unhelpful things happen to it, right?
Yeah. On Suicide Squad, it's as a producer, we were wildly successful in the gross and the money that we made on the movie and the money that the studio made and the return that everyone made.
You made like $750 million, right? Something like that?
Yeah. And it cost $175 to make. So the return was pretty good on that one. Everyone made an insane amount of money. In fact, I think it's still to this day, I think the most money that Will Smith has ever made on a movie was Suicide Squad. Because he took a lot of his fee on the back end as opposed to up front. But creatively, I don't necessarily love that movie. And I think that, and I would not put the blame by any means for that on David. There was insane studio politics happening and studio misdirection and studio interference, and a lot of studio things happened on that movie that sort of churned out what came to be. And I don't know, in a weird way, maybe that's why the movie worked so well financially, but not creatively. I don't know if our original version would have worked so well financially. It's hard to say because it was a darker movie and not for as wide of an audience. So, but that, sometimes, if it's the director or extenuating circumstances or things that surround the movie that sort of churn out a bad movie. On Suicide Squad, it was not the director.
Yeah. Let's switch gears here. I know we're winding down. When you think about David O. Russell and, writer, director, Three Kings, writer, director, Silver Linings Playbook before coming to you, obviously he'd made The Fighter. When you guys are bringing on to American Hustle, how are you thinking about his background, knowing that, look at this cast, right? Christian Bale, Bradley Cooper, Amy Adams, Jennifer Lawrence, the list just goes on, right? How are you thinking about that differently? How are you thinking about him differently? What were those conversations like amongst the producers?
Yeah, on that one, David Russell is just an incredibly talented person, and Chuck, my boss, had made Three Kings with him, so they'd already made a movie together. They had a relationship, and On that one, it was like the original script. It was originally called American Bullshit, that movie, and that original script was vastly different from the David O. Russell version of the script. It was much stiffer. It was much more formulaic. It was still a really good script, but it was just such a different tone. The tone was wildly different. And in fact, when Ben Affleck was originally going to direct that movie, and then he went off and directed Argo instead, I think that movie tonally was much more in line. The original version of that movie was much more in line with like Argo as a comp than what American Hustle became. When David O. Russell said he wanted to do the movie, your brain starts going wild. Like, well, what's that? Because like David O. Russell is the kind of person where, like, you can read a script. His name doesn't have to be on it, and you're reading it, and you know who wrote the script. There's very few writers in town that you can do that with. Like Tarantino is one of them. David Russell is one of them. Shane Black is one of them. Where they just have like a style to their writing. It's just so solidified in my brain anyways, and most of Hollywood's. And David is that guy. His every movie, if you look, they've got like a really specific tone that he's figured out, which is very David O. Russell. He's created his own style and his own tone. And so as producers, you think, wow, like it would be so interesting to bring that tone and that style into this story that we had never really thought about before, because it was always just sort of more of the formulaic version of that story. But then all of a sudden you think about, wow, what would it look like with him? And then you obviously combine that with, especially at that time, there's no actor in town that wouldn't come work for him. Everyone wanted to. And if you worked for him in a movie in a leading role, the chances you were going to get nominated for something is extraordinarily high, especially up until that point. His track record was like almost every star of every movie of his was nominated at that point. And he was just coming off a Silver Linings Playbook, where he just reinvented Bradley Cooper essentially into a serious actor, where everyone was like, holy shit, this guy can really go. Same thing with Jennifer Lawrence. She won her Oscar for Silver Linings, and so he was coming right off of that, right into our movie. And so we knew right away, and especially then look at the people he'd worked with prior in The Fighter, Christian Bale and Amy Adams and Mark Wahlberg, De Niro multiple times. There's no one that would say no to him. And I think a lot of the people just wanted to go through the experience as well of working with David Russell, because it's just such a unique experience. His style is unlike anyone else, and it's really different. And again, not for everybody, but I think a lot of actors love that challenge of trying to thread the needle with him. And so you take his tone, you take his style and his success, what kind of cast he's going to bring you. He's going to deliver you a good movie, because he's only, up until that point, he's only delivered good movies. And you take all that, and then of course you're going to have to roll the dice a little bit and hope that it all comes to be the way you see it in your head. And that way, that movie, it did, thankfully. Like, it was just like, he was the perfect guy for that story. How
many nominations did it get?
American Hustle, we got nominated for 10 Oscars and 1-0. I think we have the record actually for most nominations and no wins. We did win some Golden Globes, so that was nice. We did win best. We were in the musical comedy category for Golden Globes. We did win that, so that was cool. And I think Amy Adams won. They won for screenplay for Golden Globes. I think we won about 5 Golden Globes, but no.
So, talk me through the business implications and how that changes budgets and prep and stuff. Where you're like, you have this movie that, like you said, it has maybe more of the tone of Argo helping the Americans escape when Iran took over when the Ayatollahs and everybody took over in Iran, right?
Yeah.
And that mm-hmm. Distinctly less emotion in that movie, right?
Yeah.
What are the business implications? What are the producer implications that you guys are having in your conversations as you're reimagining this new movie, going like, oh, now this is going to be a David O. Russell movie? What are you now doing different?
Well, you're preparing yourself for awards. You go into it thinking that. I think everyone went into it thinking that like we were going to get nominated for awards, and this is going to be an awards movie. You come at it from a place of like, this is special, or it's going to be special. And especially when the cast starts lining up, that like they're doing something special and different. You could tell when you're making a movie that's going to be that kind of movie. You're watching it on screen. I remember even in Dark Knight, you watching dailies going like, okay, this is going to be something special. We weren't even like a quarter of the way done shooting the movie yet. And on American Hustle, you had that feeling every day watching what he was getting out of the actors and what he was doing. You knew it was going to be something special, but you have to like, it's tricky because there are some directors that are extraordinarily talented and their movies get nominated for awards and they win awards, but they don't make any money. And so as a producer, that's a really bitter pill to swallow because it's our responsibility to make our investors money back and not just make it back, but like make them money. And so there are some investors that just know that they just want to make a movie with X director and they're okay losing their money, just because they can substitute losing their money for getting to go to the Oscars and showing up at award shows and doing all that fun, fancy award stuff. As a producer, I try to avoid that if I can, because I would love to have success on both sides of the aisle, both financially and commercially and creatively. And so you kind of just like, there are some directors that you just like, you would never bring a big commercial movie to because you're never going to get a big commercial movie out of them, even if the script is a big commercial movie, because they will make it their own and it will feel smaller and contained and maybe a little esoteric and maybe a little bit too dramatic. And so like, you just have to, first of all, your gut tells you a lot, you have to do it a lot to know when you meet directors, what are they saying in your meeting? There's like cues that you hear certain things. You go, oh God, that's going to be a smaller movie, or it's going to be darker, or it's going to be harder to pull off. But, you kind of just know before you go to them. It's why, like when we're making directors lists for scripts that we have, you have to get creative sometimes and allow directors to walk from one side of their career to the other. Cause I think it's not fair to say, well, you've been doing comedy, so we're only going to send you comedies. But I also think as a producer, you have to be very smart in not giving them something that's too big and too much for them. And that's going to be overwhelming for them because, everyone else in their lives that depends on them financially, their agent, their manager, their lawyer is going to be pushing them to do that big, expensive payday movie. And sometimes it's not for everybody. And some directors will dip their toes in that water and realize that it wasn't a good idea. And it happened with, I'm forgetting her name, who won the Oscar for Nomadland and then did a Marvel movie that didn't work, and it just wasn't the right world for her. She's extraordinarily talented in what she did, and she took a big step up because that's sort of what you're supposed to do when you make a big movie. Then you make a small movie that wins awards. You take a big step up, but sometimes you can take a big step up and it doesn't work. As we say in Hollywood, like you're sometimes only as good as your last movie. And so you have to be really careful. You have to be really careful because you can take a big step up. It could not work. And you are not going to have an easy time getting your next movie. So a lot of times, smart agents, if they know that they have a problematic movie in the can with their client, they will do everything they can to lock in the next job before that movie comes out. So they're already off working on something else before they get, have to be judged by their movie that just got finished.
Well, I know we're out of time, but let's do this. If you were going to sum this up for investors, as they're looking at both the selection of the producer they're going to back and backing which director, and thinking about this, how would you guide them through their decision tree of like, how can they have faith that this producer knows how to both make money and do something that you're proud of as an investor? Or how do you sort through like, no, I'm in it for the money, or no, I'm actually in it for the art? And like, some of those things are implied, but it sounds like they'd be better if they were explicitly defined.
Well, I think it's important to look at a producer's track record. You can pretty easily tell if the movies that they've been involved with have been successful financially. It doesn't necessarily mean that that someone can make a really small movie, still be a great producer, and have instincts on how to do it. But that's obviously first and foremost. You can look at their track record and see what they've been involved with, and do they have historical returning their investment to their investors? Because really, that's the producer's job. Secondly, I think when you're talking about a director, you're going to want a producer that is really well connected in town, that has the ability to get their phone calls returned and picked up from all the people that had just worked with this director elsewhere. You're going to want to make sure that you've watched all that director's movies and make sure that like there's some commercial sensibility to their style and what they do. If I'm paying for a movie as an investor, I sure want to meet that director before I say yes and get a sense myself of like what they're like. You're going to want your producer in that meeting with you, but like you're still going to want to see for your, I mean, if you're going to be putting money in and giving someone responsibility of making a good movie for you, you're going to want to meet them for sure. And there's a little bit of like, it's a gamble. You gotta take a swing, but you can make a really educated guess before you do that. There's a lot of prep you could do, like a lot of things I described, while we've been talking on this podcast. And I think it's important to do all that stuff. Like you don't want a producer or a director that just wants to make a movie. You want both those people to want to make a good movie. And there's a really big difference. There's a whole demographic of people in this business, and I get it. They got to make a living, but they're just churning out stuff all the time. And they are just people that just want to be busy and make a movie. But then there's other people that just like want to make a good movie, and they're willing to be patient and wait and do it the right way with the right filmmaker and the right combination of cast. And, if you make a good movie, it's something that's remembered for, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Like it's a touchdown. You make a fast one down the middle. It's a program where you may make some money on it and it'll be forgotten 6 months later. And then as producers, we spend, as I said before, I think we spend at least 2 or 3 years of our lives on every movie we make. And that's like at a minimum. Usually it's a lot more than that. So you definitely want that time to be useful and memorable, and you want to be proud of it. And so there's a lot of due diligence you want to do before you hire a director. And as an investor, you're going to want to make sure you're partnering with a producer that has the ability to do that and knows what to do.
It sounds so much. So everybody's, most people are familiar with Warren Buffett's mentor, Ben Graham, who took his classes from Columbia University, the kind of cigar butt mentality. But not many people are quite as familiar with his other, mentor that he considers kind of as equally as important. And it's a guy named Phil Fisher, wrote an amazing book called Common Stocks, Uncommon Profits. And Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, is very much, passed away this week. What a great guy.
Yeah, I just saw that.
But was very much a Phil Fisher, like, you don't have, don't worry so much about getting a smoking deal on an average company, which is what Ben Graham did a lot of. Phil Fisher, Charlie Munger are much more of like, it's okay to pay a decent price if it's an exceptional company because you're still getting it both businesses are buying a future cash flow at a current discount, right?
Right.
But buying a great business at a fair price is actually much more enduring. Buffett always talks about a durable competitive advantage, enduring competitive advantage, all these kind of things, right? And so, but if you read Phil Fisher's book, it is not, or books, okay? It is not like full of like Greek formulas and algebra. It's like, so call the salespeople from that company because they'll take your call. You can't get through to the CEO to find out info. Call the salespeople. Salespeople will always talk to you. Call their vendors. Talk to people at the front desk. And he's like, my very sophisticated term for it is scuttlebutt. Go get the scuttlebutt on this company that you're thinking about concentrating a huge portion of your net worth in. And like, as you were talking, like all I could hear in my head is Phil Fisher, like what's the scuttlebutt? And, but also there's like this aspect of like the consolation of response that you get from all these different folks and all these different angles. He says, call their competitors, call these, and, anyways, there's an analogy.
And that's what you have to do as a producer. A good producer will do that, but you can only do that if you have experience. It takes many, many years to collect the right people in your phone to call and be able to do that, and know who to call and how to talk to them and what to ask. That's not someone that, just waltzes into town and calls himself a producer that can do that. They can't do any of that, actually. And so to me, that's, I think, where you get That's where a lot of your value is in working with an experienced producer, is being able to have someone that can do all those things, because it doesn't take that long to do that. The producers that don't do that drive me crazy, because it's like, how long does it take you to make a phone call to someone? A few minutes? And if you would have just done that, maybe you would have been able to avoid a massive landmine of stepping on a landmine of some kind, and saved yourself years of heartache and trouble. But you didn't do that, and it could have been just a 2-minute phone call to do that. So I always look at it, I'm like, why not? Call people, talk to them. Like, that's the whole point. That's how it's important, because we all, as producers and directors and anyone in this business, you have to have some accountability. And if you don't have any accountability, which means that you don't really care what people think, and you do whatever you want, you act like an asshole, and you're out of control. If people didn't talk about that, then you would be able to continue doing that. But I think that we want to, at least me, I want to avoid working with those people. And and any movie, that person is surrounded by hundreds of people every day. There's, on every movie, especially big movies, every director, there's about 300 people watching what they do every single day. You can't tell me that you can't figure a way to get to a few of those people and find out what the experience was like. Because everyone saw and everyone knows, and it's a very small town, and people love to talk and gossip over drinks and dinner.
Well, I can't get a single. I try not. It's probably impossible for me to get through a single episode of my podcast without a Warren Buffett quote, right? But he says it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to lose it, right?
Good one, yeah.
Listen, this is great. Anything you want to leave people with today?
Not really. I'm just trying to think. Please go to the movies this year and next year. Please go to the movie theater. I think next year is going to be a little rough. It's going to be a little bit lack of things for the first half of next year, but please keep going and encourage people to go, because the more people that go, we'll get better movies. We'll get more opportunities to make better movies. Not to say to avoid streaming movies, but come on, let's go. Go to the movie theaters, guys. Spend your holidays in the movie theaters. I know there's not going to be amazing stuff out there, but the awards movies this year are great. There are some great movies, great awards movies out there. Okay. And if you haven't seen them, they'll all be back out in the theaters.
So, final comment. I'm super excited. We've got our big fancy party in LA. Thank you for coming. Next Tuesday, got about 50 people. All these billionaires and CEOs and Hollywood people like yourself. I'm super excited to meet one of Laura's friends who just produced Ferrari, that's coming out on Christmas Day with Adam Driver. Nice. And I'm like, I think that's what I'm doing. At least my one teenage son I know will go to that with me. I think after the presents are open and all this stuff, I'm probably going to the theater to go watch Ferrari in the theater.
You should, because it's good. I mean, I've heard it's good, but I don't know how much a teenager's going to love it. I've heard it's a little bit artsy, a little bit adult. So I'm so curious to see what a teenager thinks of it. It doesn't. Yeah, but no, I'm not saying it's R-rated. I'm just saying it's more of an adult themed movie. It's not necessarily a fun movie with a bunch of race cars in it. It's a very, very different take on it, at least from what I've heard. I haven't seen it, but there are some great movies out there. I mean, boy, The Holdovers is amazing. You should go see that in the theaters if you haven't seen it. It's a really great holiday family movie. It's one of my favorite of the year. There's an amazing movie that if it's in the theater somehow, it's called Godzilla -1. I just saw it last night, and it's this new Godzilla movie that was made in Japan. It is some of the most impressive visual effects I have ever seen, and it is probably the best version of Godzilla anyone will ever see on the big screen. If you have the chance to see it, go find that in the theaters. It's really fun. There's great stuff in the movie theaters this year, and they don't have to be, you don't have to go out there and rush and see Aquaman or some of the big studio movies or Wonka, but there's amazing smaller awards movies that you're going to see in the theaters more, because there's not a lot of movies to be released at the end of this year, at the beginning of next year. So it'll give the smaller movies a little bit bigger of a boost in the theatrical space. Go see those movies.
I love it. Okay, as always, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, buddy.